This is Ezekiel 36, 8 to 12. But you, mountains of Israel, will extend your branches and bear your fruit for my people Israel, because they will come home very soon. Look, I'm here for you, and I will turn toward you, and you will be farmed and sown. I will populate you with human beings, the whole house of Israel, all of them. The cities will be inhabited, the ruins rebuilt. When I make people and the animals increase on you, they will multiply and be fruitful. I will cause you to be habited as you were before. I will be more good for you than in the walk through you. My people Israel, they will lay claim to you. You will be their inheritance, and you will no longer deprive them of anything.
Thank you, Phyllis. Would you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, Lord, for you are our strength and our salvation. Amen. Did you notice who is the target of Ezekiel's prophecy here? Unusual, isn't it? In this passage, Ezekiel addresses his words of hope not to people, but to the mountains. He actually also does this in the 6th chapter of Ezekiel, where his message is of devastation rather than hope, as he describes the consequences of the people's unfaithfulness and how they were, as a result, brutally stripped from the land, leaving a mess behind. The 2 chapters serve as counterbalances to one another, with the mountains of Israel as the entity addressed by God through the prophet. So often, at least from the perspective of so-called civilized mindsets, the inanimate world around us is simply the setting or the backdrop of our stories. But Ezekiel's colorful word pictures might suggest otherwise. I hope you will receive the photos that are going to appear on the screen today as a gift and an enhancement, and not as Facebook-type bragging about our trip 2 weeks ago to visit family in Colorado. I had not deliberately scheduled our vacation to correspond with preaching on this particular text, but, we think about our messages in a few weeks in advance, and while I was away, Ezekiel's words were certainly echoing through my head as I beheld the many scenic vistas on the train route, and as my parents talked about the complexities of water issues in the high desert region where they live on the western slope of the Rockies. During our time together, we visited the majestic Black Canyon of the Gunnison, a lesser-known national park and a treasure, and the waters below a dam that holds back and diverts some of that great river. We also hiked out to see ancient petroglyphs in a nearby conservation area and visited the Ute Museum in Montrose, which shares stories of courage, heartbreak, and resilience from the indigenous people who were driven off their ancestral lands by white settlers and the forces of the American government over a period of just 40 years in the 1800s. But those are stories that will wait for another day and may well find their way into an expansion of the Sacred Ground Project. One thing that struck me as we traveled through this vast, open, less human inhabited terrain is how the land itself takes center stage in such places. And how 21st century humans, at least humans with an eye for profit and development, often imagine that they can simply plop a new building or a bunch of buildings or a resource extraction project onto a vacant plot like it's the natural course of growth, and that they can manipulate the environment to make it habitable. This example is where they diverted some of the Gunnison River in order to make farmland down in this canyon, and there's a wonderful peach orchard down there that my dad pointed out to us. But it's obviously not the way that it would have been had there not been that water pouring through there. In recent years, there have been movements afoot to designate ecosystems as entities of sacred worth and legal status for the purpose of arguing in court, filing lawsuits, and establishing policies to protect those ecosystems as fellow beings on our planet. And what is remarkable about Ezekiel's prophecy to the mountains, who at first seemed to be witnesses, hapless victims, or survivors in the face of evil human activity happening upon them, is that in the restoration to come, they will be partners with the people. They will be partners with the people and with God. There's this sense of togetherness in the picture of transformation that is painted by Ezekiel and read for us by Phyllis. The passage bears echoes of the creation story in Genesis, with people, plants, and animals multiplying and being fruitful. You remember that phrase, multiply and be fruitful? Furthermore, Ezekiel says things will be better than they were before, with more good. Remember again from the Genesis story, it was very good. Here Ezekiel says it'll be even more good that's coming out of this partnership than in those days past. It's a vision of that ancient partnership instituted by God, picked up and carried on. Now, there are times that I will admit that I look upon the land and I think it would be better off with no humans on it. Does anyone feel that way sometimes? So often I see damage wrought by pollution, extraction, violence, and greed, all the byproducts of human activity. And I think a component of what some psychologists now term climate anxiety, which is particularly affecting many young people these days, is this idea that people are taking up too much space on this planet, and that they do more harm than good. And in some extreme cases, this climate anxiety is manifesting itself in practices like self-starvation, trying literally to make one's very self as small as possible so as not to generate more negative impacts on the earth. Others have chosen not to have children out of fear of what they anticipate the future will be like. And then there's this fatalistic sentiment expressed by those who just throw up their hands and say the world's going to blow up, or something like that. Whether it be massive war, disease, drought, or some other natural catastrophe, resulting in the extermination of humanity, and then the earth will recover over time on its own. The portrait painted by Ezekiel, however, declares that we are all in this together. Land, plants, animals, and people together. All suffer in times of chaos, but all are meant to coexist in harmony. What seems most often to get in the way is human pride. So in this text, I hear an invitation to practice humility. Not only in relation to God, but humility in relation to my non-human siblings, the plants and creatures and rivers and valleys and mountains, and for their sake, humility in my relationship with fellow human beings. May we work in concert, walking with God for the well-being of all of God's precious ones, the two-legged, four-legged, six-legged, feathered, furry, scaly, adorned with leaves, residing deep in the earth and the elements of the earth itself. May we be willing to put our own comfort and convenience aside for a change, and even put aside our need to be right or strong out of reverence for this blessed planet that we share, and which is a gift to be carefully stewarded. I've promised during this series to share a glimpse of the Sacred Ground project each week, highlighting a location within Sonoma County's watersheds, in keeping with the ecumenical season of creation emphasis for this year. You may not have ever visited Schollenberger Wetlands in Petaluma. Any hands up that have ever even heard of Schollenberger Wetlands? It's probably not on the list of most tourists' must-see destinations. But as you may realize, and as you can read from the info tab on the app for this location, Petaluma sits at the top of the San Pablo Bay in a valley flanked to the east by the Sonoma Mountains and the Merced Hills to the west, creating a natural funnel for mists and breezes, sea breezes through the Estero Gap. The Coast Miwok people were the first to fish the waters of what is today called the Petaluma River, a saltwater estuary. Intensive development to access the agricultural resources of this region over a period of 150 years or so led to regular dredging of the river for steamboat and other traffic, threatening the fragile marsh ecosystems. Schollenberger Park was created in 1995 when city crews added a walking surface to the levees which had contained the mud from the dredging operations. The flat paths and abundant bird life make this a pleasant diversion from the bustle of human activity nearby. The Sacred Ground app reminds visitors that marshes are nature's water filters, straining out toxins and preventing the flooding of lowlands during periods of heavy precipitation and unusually high tides. They are also the target of developers who ignore their ecological value. As an invitation to take a faithful action, the app notes that nonprofit organizations dedicated to preserving fragile wetlands are often in need of volunteers, and suggests that one might consider joining a cleanup crew or a team removing invasive plants and replacing them with native species, as it is a rewarding way to spend a morning. Here's what you will hear, at least for a while, when you click on the narration button. It's going to change soon because I got Pastor Rob Herman, who's the pastor at St. John's Rohnert Park and Petaluma United Methodist Church, to replace my voice with his, but my voice is what you'll hear right now. Let's listen to that narration. With the daily shifting of the tides, this area ebbs back and forth between fresh and salt water. Unique plants thrive in this brackish environment, and a variety of birds follow the daily rhythm as they search for their favorite foods. You might want to consult a tide table, and if you visit here more than once, take notice of what's different depending on the flow of water. More than most places, this spot changes quickly and often with the season, the tide, the daylight, wind, etc. Yet there is always a place where some life, and usually some bird life, is attracted. Consider this lesson from nature's wisdom. Everyone, no matter what their characteristics, has a place in the Creator's world and plan. You have a place. In that knowledge, let us practice compassion and tolerance for all creatures, human and more than human. There are lessons to be learned when we look to the mountains or the marshes, valleys, or rivers. May we walk in harmony with them and with our human siblings as well. Amen.